This is The Perspective.
Joining us now is the Vice President of the ISC Sports Network, the voice of the Indy 11, and the postgame host for the Colts radio network, also of WFNI 107.5 The Fan in Indianapolis, Greg Rakestraw. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Of course, Parker. Happy to hop on with you.
So my first question for you today is, how did you get your start working in radio?
Because I had a face made for it, I think is the standard joke that goes along with that. I graduated from the University of Indianapolis, and I was lucky enough to attend school there and go to a place that had a very professional radio station. It was not the typical, college radio experience. We played jazz, we played classical, we did news, we did sports. You were expected to be a pro from once you got your training on, and it was a great place for me to learn. And it was also very fortuitous that I attended school at the University of Indianapolis, because it allowed me to then work part-time in Indianapolis while I was still in college. So I have been working in sports radio or sports television now for nearly 26 years in terms of the market. I worked at Sports Radio 1260 WNDE for 2 years as a part-timer, and then literally got hired full-time the month before I graduated college. So I never had to go do kind of the small town radio thing and then try to work my way back to the big city. My career has really been in the Indianapolis market for its entirety. But that's where it began, at the University of Indianapolis.
What was the driving force behind you wanting to work in radio? Why did you choose radio?
Chose radio. I knew I wanted to work in sports broadcasting. I think the radio component of it was simply, that was what the program that I went to was good in. Now they've got a much more competent television program. It was really a radio, then journalism, then TV driven program when I was at UIndy, when I was in school there. Now you see people going the television routes. It's always a strong radio program at UIndy. It always has been, really, for the last 30 or 40 years. So that's why I kind of matriculated radio, then television, then back to radio, and then kind of back to television, which is what I primarily do these days. But that's the big reason why it was radio first for me.
Now, radio has disappeared from the face of the earth. If there was no radio, if there was no broadcasting, what would Greg Rakestraw be doing?
I'd be in trouble because I'm old enough now where I don't have there's no more plan B or C for me, because I've been doing this for 25 years. In all seriousness, if I had not done radio and television, I'm sure I would have been a high school teacher. I'm sure I would have been a high school coach. That is the route that I would have gone. Although now I say that these days, the other field that I occasionally think about getting into would be college athletics administration, just because I have now spent the better part of 30 years first playing a sport in college and then now covering college sports. And I've been lucky enough to do so really at all levels, at Division I, Division II, Division III, at the NAIA level. So I have a decent amount of experience in terms of, I think, what sets up a successful collegiate athletic program, both on the court, in the classroom, in the community. So the standard answer would be teaching and coaching at the high school level. The answer that, again, I'm not planning on making a career move, but maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, potentially running a collegiate athletic department would be something that would appeal to me.
Now, before you got into radio, what is one thing that you wish you had known before you started your career?
That's a good, there's all kind of stuff I wish that I would have known. Part of it would have been, for as career driven as I always have been, it would have been to kind of stop and smell the roses a little bit more, in terms of, because, once you get to college, you are focused on, what your career is going to be. And I had a good time in college, don't get me wrong. But I probably would have given myself more time to relax and enjoy things, because I was so career driven and focused during my college days, and still to this point.
Now, how have things changed in the radio industry since you started broadcasting 25 years ago?
How have things not changed? Might be the quicker answer.
Yeah.
To that question. Well, to put it in perspective, when I was hired at 1260 in May of 1996, the radio group that I worked for, which is now the iHeart cluster in Indianapolis, which has 5 stations. Back then it was 3, and it wasn't iHeart, it wasn't Clear Channel. There were still a couple of different sales of the group that had to take place. But at that point in time, there was somebody in the room for those 3 stations, the AM Sports Talk station, the alternative rock station, and the classic rock station. For those of you that are familiar with Bob and Tom, nationally syndicated radio program, Bob and Tom have emanated from Q95 in Indianapolis for the last 40 years. Even though Bob and Tom are no longer owned by iHeart, they still operate out of that station. That's still kind of where the flagship is, where the studios are, etc. So anyway, there was somebody in the room. There was a live disc jockey running the board on the air 24/7, 365. That may not have been the case at a lot of radio stations in the mid-90s even. That is most certainly not the case now. Let me hit the fast forward button. In my days at Emmis Communications, and you referenced 107.5 The Fan in Indianapolis, that was my last full-time radio gig, and I left there in April of 2018. Still do some part-time stuff and still do some talent and on-air stuff for that group. But I was the program director there for the better part of 5 years. And we had one person in the building at all times. Basically, our 50,000 watt FM news talk station, even if it was automated, there was literally a person in the room just in case anything went wrong at any of those 4 stations. And so with that, it tells you, again, the opportunities to get your foot in the door and work part-time, because part-time work becomes full-time. Those are so much different than what it was for a broadcast student, a graduate of a broadcast program when I graduated 24 years ago compared to what it is now. It's still a matter of, as a broadcaster, there's not exactly a lot of weed out classes for broadcasters. This is not, biology 101 where the professor says, hey, turn to your left, hey, turn to your right. Hey, one of you will not be here, at the end of the semester. We don't have that as broadcasters. Life tends to be our weed out class because you don't make very much money when you graduate. You have to kind of work your way in to a higher paying job. And I think it is so much tougher to get a job in radio than it was 25, 30 years ago. To me, that's the biggest change.
Now you're the post-game host for the Colts radio network in the fall and into the winter for the Indianapolis Colts. What is the news came out yesterday that Matt Ryan has been traded from the Falcons to the Indianapolis Colts. What is your opinion on what Matt Ryan brings to this Colts offense?
A consistent presence, a known commodity. It's just a solid pro, probably a borderline Hall of Famer at this point. I'm happy with the move. I think he maybe has a lot of the qualities of Phillip Rivers, a little more mobility, nowhere near the mobility of Carson Wentz. And again, Matt Ryan alone won't make this necessarily in a playoff team. He will need some help. The Colts will have to invest at the wide receiver position, at the tight end position, at the left tackle position. But I think the Colts are a far better football team today than they were at this time a day ago before this move was made.
Now, I'm a Hoosier as well, as you well know. We had the great opportunity of speaking at the Horizon League Championships, and you've been a part of IUPUI basketball for some time now. What is it about the Horizon League that people may not know that gives it such great basketball play?
Well, I hope the league gets back to what it once was. This is a league that was founded to be a basketball league when it was founded as the Midwestern Cities Conference all the way back in 1979. Butler was a part of this league for its first 30 plus years. Evansville during their heyday was a part of this league up until the mid 90s. Go back to Marquette and Dayton. And clearly you've got schools that still take it seriously, a la a Northern Kentucky, a la a Wright State, as in the two that made the championship game. But there needs to be more investment from the other schools in the league to try to get this league. I'm not sure, because the landscape is so different, if the Horizon League in 2022 will be what the Horizon League was in 2002 or 1992. It is tougher. There is a larger gap. Even though you see upsets in the NCAA tournament, from a resource standpoint, there is a larger gap than ever before between a Power 5 school, or in basketball, I think it really becomes kind of Power 6, Power 7, Power 8, because you can have a league like the West Coast Conference or the A-10 or the Mountain West that can be multiple bid leagues in the NCAA tournament. But between those guys and what are known as the mid-majors, I'm not sure that mid-major really exists anymore. There's the top 100 schools in Division I, and then there's the other 250. Well, the other 250 are going to have to spend some money to be able to try to stay up. You're not going to compete equally with those schools, but to be closer to those schools. And I think right now that's the biggest problem that we deal with in the Horizon League, is there needs to be more schools spending more resources to make sure they have, competitive programs, and especially in the league's franchise sport in terms of men's basketball.
Now, from a Wright State perspective, from an outsider's perspective, I may be a little biased when it comes to talking about Wright State, but what do you see as the future of Wright State basketball from the eyes of Greg Rakestraw?
Well, I think the question is Scott Nagy going anywhere? Obviously we've already seen Dennis Gates, leave Cleveland State, for Missouri. And I'm almost surprised that Dennis didn't go someplace last year because I thought the world of Dennis and the job he did at Cleveland State after that program had gotten really down at the end of the Gary Waters tenure. And then the Dennis Felton tenure was just a wrong step from the start. They went from worst to first in the league in the span of about 24 months. And that was really impressive. Obviously, Wright State has been a program that has been far more successful than not. I think Billy Donlin, before Scott got there, I thought did a good job. I thought Billy's a great coach. I think recruiting sometimes, maybe struggle a little bit. Scott has up that level. And in terms of fan bases, there's not many, if any, that top Wright State in terms of our league, because Dayton, Ohio is one of the great college basketball communities in this country. So I think the question for Wright State fans is always going to be, at least in the next couple of years, is Scott going to stay? Is Scott going to go? Obviously, the other thing that the Raiders need is more talent to go along with a really good 4 or 5 player core, because clearly the bench was a problem this year because they didn't get used very much. And if you can keep a Basili, a Holden, et cetera together, then I think Wright State, if the core group stays intact of the 4 or 5 guys that were the key pieces this year, if those guys stay and you add a dynamic freshman, or you potentially add, a grad transfer or two, then I think Wright State can be St. Peter's next year. They can be a team that makes a Sweet 16 run, because again, they've got some really talented pieces. They just need more depth. And then the question is, hey, is Scott going to stick this out, or does Scott feel he's got maybe one more stop left in what has been a tremendous coaching career? And does he want to try to move up the food chain a little bit in terms of Division I coaching?
Now, going back to Indianapolis sports, whether it's auto racing, which Indianapolis is known for, the racing capital of the world, if you will, whether it's basketball, what is it? Try to explain to the people that aren't from Indiana or in our Dayton audience, what is it about sports in the state of Indiana and the city of Indianapolis that make them so special?
Well, I would say this. I mean, I think every community, every Midwestern community, has a great passion for sports. And whether it is, whether you're a basketball state like Indiana, more of a football state like Ohio, I think when you are from a Midwestern place where you've got 3 or 4 months where you're primarily indoors, watching sports on your television becomes a much bigger deal than other parts of the country. But what makes Indianapolis unique was the fact that 40 some odd years ago, Indianapolis was known, derisively as Indianapolis, and it was Naptown, and it was a Rust Belt community, and it became, what can we do to put Indianapolis in a more relevant place in this nation's landscape from an economic standpoint? And that became to be the amateur sports capital of the world. And eventually that morphed into, hey, let's bring a National Football League team here. And it became, hey, we've got a pro basketball team. Let's make sure they're revitalized and they're taken care of and they're playing in a world-class facility. And obviously now for over a century, we've had the world's greatest race course and the world's greatest single-day sporting event where, and this, predates the pandemic, but Indianapolis basically, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway becomes the 58th or 59th largest city in America the Sunday before Memorial Day weekend because of 300,000+ people all gathered in a facility that seats 230 something thousand and stretches for 9 city blocks from 16th Street to 25th Street. And so what makes Indianapolis unique in terms of other sports communities in this country is not just the passion we have for our professional teams or for our college teams. And in Indianapolis, you can make a good living, as I do, working primarily in covering high school sports because we have a passion for that around here too. But it is the amount of events that we host. It is being the home to the NCAA, is being the home to USA Gymnastics and USA Track and Field and USA Swimming and Diving and the United States Auto Club and many teams in the IndyCar and NHRA. We are a sports hub, and we kind of realized that, well before others figured out, hey, sports can be a full-time business for a community, and that's what we've got here, and that's what makes Indianapolis different than any other place in the U.S. from a sports perspective.
Now, talking about the city of Indianapolis as a whole, the city has hosted many big name events, from Super Bowls to the state of Indiana hosted the entire NCAA tournament a year ago. What makes the city of Indianapolis a great spot for hosting events like those?
Part of it is it is the Crossroads America. And like, for example, let's go on a micro level here. When you and I saw each other a couple of weeks ago, Indianapolis is the home of the Horizon League because it is smack dab in the middle of its members. And when IUPUI made the move from the Summit League to the Horizon League, their travel budget was slashed to about 25% of what it used to be because they're not flying to the Dakotas or Denver or Tulsa. No, IUPUI is catching a bus to go to Green Bay and or Robert Morris. That is the far ends of the league. And so it's part of why the Horizon League tournament is here. It's part of why that's a great move for IUPUI, but it also works that way in terms of hosting sporting events. We literally are the Crossroads of America. We're a very easy place to get to. Secondly, because of how downtown is laid out, we call this a 2-cab ride town, or maybe in the more modern parlance, a 2 Uber town. One to get from the airport to downtown, the other one to go home back to the airport when you're done. I'll cite the example of the Super Bowl, which I can't believe it's been 10 years since the Super Bowl was in Indianapolis. We were blessed with some remarkably warm weather for the first week in February. It was a case where, temperatures were in the 50s and 60s for most of that week. And as you well know, that is not the norm around here.
Yeah.
Well, downtown became basically the Olympic Village. And there were restaurateurs and hoteliers and merchants in the Broad Ripple area, which is where I live. And for point of reference for those outside of Indy, kind of where Butler University is right next to Broad Ripple, about 5 or 6 miles north of downtown proper. There were bars here that didn't see much more than their usual traffic that week, because you would have 500,000 people that were hanging out in downtown Indianapolis. And so it's kind of the reason why the NFL scouting combine has been here for so long, because everything is in walking distance. Everything is so quick and easy to get around to. So whether it's the Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament, Final Four, whatever the case may be, the combination of Hoosier hospitality, a good-looking downtown, and a well-planned downtown is part of what makes Indianapolis such a special place to host a sporting event.
Well, Greg, I can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate you joining us this afternoon.
Anytime, buddy. You take care.